Welcome to Public Safety Talk Radio, the podcast for all of our heroes in public safety, including law enforcement professionals, firefighters, EMTs, corrections officers, healthcare workers, and more. The show is proud to be a part of the growing National Police Podcast Network. This episode is sponsored by Police Mortgage. Police Mortgage is a full-service mortgage company dedicated to serving police officers and first responders. Founded in 2008, Police Mortgage offers a variety of mortgage products tailored to meet the needs of those who serve and protect. Police Mortgage, for first responders who are second to none. I am Ken Bader, your host for Public Safety Talk Radio, and as we begin to wrap up what I believe is an awesome season of Public Safety Talk Radio, our first season on the National Police Podcast Network, we have saved one of our best guests for last. He's a retired police officer. He is a great author. I'm not even going to go into paragraphs on him because we're going to learn more about the great Kevin Grogan right now. Kevin, welcome to the show.
Hey, I appreciate it. I don't know how much greatness there is left, but I appreciate the intro.
Well, I'll tell you, you are the creator of Savannah's True Crime Trilogy, and as a guy that spent 3 years covering true crime for Podcast Magazine, that is something great in my mind, man.
I'd tell you, it was a stroke of luck. Lemons out of lemonade, or lemonade out of lemons. So
there you go. Well, if you could make lemons out of lemonade, that's like, water into wine type stuff. That would
kind
be
of like half of one and 6 dozen of the other. I'm great with these things.
or as my grandmother used to tell me, same difference.
There you go.
So I as a fellow author, you've written a lot more books than I have. But as a fellow author, I really want to dig into that. But before I do that, let's dive in a little bit to your police career. You were a police officer for the Savannah Chatham Metropolitan Police Department. Tell us a little bit about that.
All I can say about my career is that it was lucky until the end. I served in a variety of roles. Started out in patrol, obviously. Loved that. Very quickly got put on a specialized unit, just right time, right place kind of thing. It's called the Expanded Patrol Operation. I only bring that up because that's the topic of the first book, Black Sheep, White Cop, Savannah Exposed. Then I wound up on an OCDF case with the ATF, working some gangs, but that all came from, work that I was doing in my beat on patrol. Then I actually left Savannah for a narcotics task force because I was not too thrilled with the way our local narcotics task force was doing things. So I stepped outside, did about 3 years working dope, wound up working another OCDF case with the DEA and FBI, same kind of gang stuff, but kind of perfecting that technique and skill. Then when my mentor and chief was made interim, he went from interim to full-time chief back in Savannah. I went back to Savannah.
Nice.
And I was back for a couple of months when I got stuck on yet another task force where we're just working gangs with the ATF again, and did that for about 2 years before going to homicide. Then when I wound up in homicide for about 2 years, prior to all that, I am an Army combat veteran and had some issues in the desert. I never really addressed them like most of us don't. I didn't know what was wrong with me. I just knew something was not good. And about 10 years into it, it came crashing down on me. So that ended my career in a DUI in spectacular fashion. It was really, of all the DUIs in history, mine turned out to be one of the better ones. I wound up in a horrifically, so this is 2014, right after Ferguson and that. So I wound up in a horrifically political situation where for 2 years, 7 months, and 13 days, not that I counted or held my breath, I was kind of waiting for my trial to see what was going on, because the DUI I was absolutely guilty of, but the political shit they tried to rope me into was not cool at all. So we wound up going to trial. I was found guilty of my DUI and acquitted of the other crap. But during that time is when I started writing. So a guy was running for mayor of Savannah right after I had unceremoniously left the police department, and
Mhm.
his big mission was to fix the police department. I could tell him what was really going on. I could speak for the troops uh, and not worry about any retribution from City Hall or
Sure.
the brass of the police department. So, like I said, that really is what started the that started the writing career.
Mm. Well, two important things. One, thank you for your service, both as a military vet and a police officer. I honor both of those things. And two, as a guy that's over 6 years sober, understand what it's like to get yourself in trouble with some drinking. Fortunately, I never had a DUI. I do remember waking up in an alley once. That was kind of fun. Story for maybe another episode, but in terms of the DUI, I hope you're doing much better than you were about 12 years ago.
Yeah, no, I look at it like this. 12,952 times I got away with it. That
Yeah.
12,952nd time was a doozy, and it caught
Hmm.
up. But I'm glad it caught me then, because if I had gotten away with it yet again, the next one, or the one that got me, would have been much, much worse. So,
Yeah.
I'm actually thankful that things have worked out the way they've worked out.
Yeah, yeah, I am thankful as well. We're able to enjoy your writing because of it, and I could speak from experience. While I didn't have as harrowing a last time as you did, I was glad that my last drunk, I didn't hurt anybody, was able to turn things around. But one question that I have is. Yeah, about Savannah in particular, because for those folks watching or listening, Savannah is a really unique city. Out there, I mean, you can't even get there easily. I mean, you either gotta, fly into Atlanta and drive a boring 4 hours all the way to the coast, or, find a puddle jumper that'll take you there. Although I think United's got flights going there now. I just had the pleasure of being there like 3 or 4 times on different occasions, and I found it to be really interesting, very, very unique type of city in the United States. It's not a small town. It's not a big metropolitan area, but there's certainly crime there and a lot of interesting things. Yeah, is there anything from a police standpoint that makes Savannah unique, or is it just, another city with the same drugs and gangs and everything else that any big city would have?
Well, Savannah's got its own style. I call it
Mhm.
the Boston of the South.
Hmm.
It's a very historical city.
Yeah.
It's Georgia's first city, established in 1733. But uh, it's definitely got its own twisted things. We have a huge port here, so of course when
Hmm.
you have containers coming in and out, who knows I mean, what else is coming in and going out. But Savannah has its a very proud history of violence. We solve problems with guns down here, which is unfortunate, but we do it politely. Everybody's blessing each other's hearts and that kind of thing. But the violent crime here, the rate, it's down now uh, as far as killing go. But I always
Hmm.
say that's because there's a level one trauma center, Memorial Health, and they
Right.
turn a lot of shootings. They keep them shootings as opposed to homicide because of the great work that they do.
Yeah.
But Savannah really is, and we're right on I-95, so
Hmm.
you definitely have a lot of traffic coming in and out through 95, the 95 corridor, through the port again. But the problem in Savannah is the same with everything, where you have poverty. So you have the richest of the rich surrounded by the poorest of the poor. So Savannah's tourist district, the historic district where millions of people come a year to see because somebody wrote a book 30 years ago,
Hmm.
and then Clint Eastwood made the movie about it. That has built a huge tourist industry on top of the fact that, in my not so humble opinion, it really is the prettiest city in the country.
Yeah. Yeah, it is a picturesque city. And that's a good way of putting it. Kind of the Boston of the South, having been to Boston a number of times too. I would concur with that, that it's kind of got that small town feel. And I appreciate that, I remember being proud. I think this is how we got connected. I remember from a colleague, Lou Velozzi, who wrote Storefront Sting. Great book. I'm sure is as good as the three that you wrote. I haven't gotten to your
Great
three
book,
yet.
great book, great guy.
Yeah, he is a great guy. I could see both of you saying, "May we have your guns, please?"
Yeah.
In a very polite way. So let's get
He's
it.
much sweeter about it than I was.
Yeah, yeah. Well, I haven't seen you in person. Lou is a pretty big, imposing dude.
He is definitely he can definitely say it much kinder and have people comply just from
Yeah,
the appearance.
yeah. I had him speak at a conference once, and it was the first time I met him. And he walked in, I'm like, "Oh, holy shit!"
No, lose one of those guys, man. He can hang out in the trenches and
Yeah.
fit right in, and then he can comb his hair and sit in the Oval Office and hold his own there too. He's a highly intelligent guy. He actually has a new book out,
Oh,
Ray Khan,
yep. I
which
saw
is
that
the story
online.
of his informant. Yeah, so it just I worked with Lou when he was working with Ray initially in one of their storefront operations and he's just a great guy and a legend if you ask me in the law enforcement community.
Yeah, he really is, and I'll have to get his new book. I read Storefront Sting, I think one and a half times. Great book. But let's talk about another great book, and that is No Greater Honor, No Bigger Failure, and I believe that just came out. Kevin, talk about that.
And now a word from our sponsor, Police Mortgage.
As a first responder, control isn't optional. It's how you do your job. But when it comes to buying or refinancing a home, most lenders don't get your world. Police Mortgage does. They specialize in working with first responders, walking you through the process, breaking down your options, and helping you lock in competitive rates without the runaround. Take control of your financial future with people who have your back. Visit policemortgage.com or call 312 499 8878. Police Mortgage for first responders who are second to none.
And learn more about Police Mortgage from their podcast, The Mortgage Beat, another podcast in the National Police Podcast Network.
Yeah, so it's been out about 3 weeks, been crushing it. It's always very humbling to me that people actually pay money for what I write, but I really appreciate it. Uh, but like I said, my books come from turmoil. They
Mhm.
when I started writing the first one, it was actually Lou that inspired me to do it because we were following our buddy Jay Dobbins, another ATF legend. But it started off as war stories. They started going that way. But this book that I finally got out after about 10 years of writing, even more than that, uh, it was a process. My first two books are a lot of fun, a lot of running and gunning, a lot of war stories, with my political twist I try to put in to make
Mhm.
my points. This one was nothing but gut wrenching and soul stealing, because it's the nature of homicide. You're looking at the worst thing that humans can do, well, close to the worst thing that humans can do to each other. And there weren't a lot of good memories with it. Not only was it a rough position that everybody who's ever worked law enforcement it stumbles into, but the actual investigation of it, I mean, what was going on in my personal life at the time. So I told the story as I always do, in a very honest way. I dump out, I let you know, I let true crime enthusiasts know how cool it is to work a murder. There's a reason that it's on TV and they make
Mhm.
movies about it because the glamorous side is awesome. But I show you the flip side in this book too. I show you what it does to families, what it does to people, and what it does to the investigators who are working those cases.
Yeah, as I mentioned at the beginning of our little conversation, I was never a police officer, but I covered true crime podcasts for 3 years in Podcast Magazine. And I developed a what is probably a very vicarious, small appreciation for what guys like you and gals like you do and did. Because there were some of these podcasts that were very factual, and very graphic. And I used to cover them, and I used to listen to these podcasts while I was walking and doing other things, as consuming them like most listeners would. And I remember some of these podcasts, I'd be walking and I'd have to turn it off. I'm like, I gotta turn this off. I've heard this, these things for years, and I actually have to turn it off right now for my mental health. You guys can't do that. You can't say, I'm just gonna take a day. Crimes need to be solved.
No, and it's a lot to stomach. That's the thing. I've found that the whole true crime genre, a lot of it is people reading about cases and hearing about cases. That's the thing about my work is your nose is right there. You're on the ground, and I try to show it from as many angles as I can. But just the nature of violent crime. Working any violent crimes. You're talking shootings, stabbings, kidnappings, whether they're domestic or non-domestic, and then of course the murders are what gets the most attention, obviously.
Mhm.
But the greatest thing for me, the coolest thing about this particular book is the forwards written by my uncle. My
Nice.
uncle retired as a deputy chief of police in Springfield, Massachusetts, but where he made his bones was in investigations and in particular homicide. So he wrote the forward for it. He's the reason I became a cop, and that was another kind of thing mixed into the title of No Greater Honor. It's no greater honor for me to have him do that. But the homicide investigator's creed, not very many people know that there is one, but there is. And it
I
starts
didn't.
out
Yeah.
no greater honor, and it basically says there is no greater honor than being the voice for the dead. So that's where it all comes from. The no bigger failure is it that gets into a very specific case that I worked where had I had my head on straight, in hindsight being 2020, of course, uh, two more people might not be dead because I had the guy dead to rights and just didn't do a good enough job to get him. And
Yeah.
and homicide investigations, unlike anything, are they are so much under the microscope. Every little detail matters, and you have to do it as near perfect as you possibly can, especially in today's day and age where everybody believes CSI. They believe that that's the way you should have everything on video, everything should be GPS tracked. There you should have followed the vapor trail from the crime scene and that kind of stuff. So overcoming those unrealistic ideas in trial today, I really don't know how the guys and girls do it today. It's insane.
Yeah, obviously from my prior work at Podcast Magazine, my wife and I are big true crime enthusiasts. I don't like to use the word true crime fans. A
Right,
fan of crime? Yeah,
right.
but what we enjoy is the forensic, the solving, the putting together the puzzle piece of those stories. Not the fact that they happen. But in a number of shows that we've watched and listened to lately, in fact, one in particular, I can't remember the name of the case, but the police officers found DNA, and the district attorney says, that's not quite enough. We need a little bit more. And then they found a connection, with a cell phone. It's like, well, that puts them there, but that's not quite enough. We need just a little bit more.
Well, and
And
in the case that I'm referring to, I caught the guy in possession of one of the weapons that was used in the murder, and that was not quite enough. And the thing is, that's absolutely correct. It wasn't enough. I mean, if you say it to somebody and they're like, "Well, you had the gun that was involved in the murder," well, there's a lot more to it than just that, just a cell phone hit or just the DNA, because it all depends on those minuscule little details, which is why you need to be very good at what you're doing to be working that type of case.
Yeah, and a lot of these district attorneys, they don't want to go to court if there's even the slightest possibility of reasonable doubt brought on the other side. They want to they want to have all the cards in their hands if they can.
Well, and that's, a lot of cops, obviously the standard is probable cause, meaning they probably did it. My
Yeah,
standard, especially in homicide, was beyond reasonable doubt. Like I wouldn't charge it if I didn't know you did it. If there
right.
was any question. Now, whether I could prove it exactly, but that's a whole different story.
Right. Right. Well, let's get into the trilogy. You have the Savannah's True Crime trilogy, of which No Greater Honor, No Bigger Failure is the third installment of that. Talk about the first two installments and when you started writing, had you gone down this path in your head of, hey, this could be a trilogy, or you wrote the first book and at some point it became a trilogy?
Well, I had zero intentions of writing ever. Again, it was, my dear friend and brother Lou Velozzi came to me and said, "Hey, man, I'm going to write." Bird wrote a book, being Jay Dobbins, and it's one of those things where all alphas. Anything he can do, I can do better. So Lou started to write his book, and Lou's stories are Jay's stories are incredible. His basically Hall of Fame career. Lou's stories are absolutely incredible, and they're stories that have never been told until he told them. So I'm like, dude, I don't know anything about writing books, but the guy that was running for mayor that I was trying to give
Hmm.
insight to, he's an internationally best-selling author named Murray Silver. He wrote Great Balls of Fire, which is Jerry Lee Lewis's biography. So I'm like, dude, I'll introduce you to this guy, and you can hash out how the book business goes. So over a couple lunches and conversations and stuff like that, we got talking. And they're like, hey, you should write your stuff down too. And I'm like, yeah, I'm not that smart. I don't know that many words. I went to Westfield State College in Massachusetts. Didn't do very well. Um, just shout out to the Fighting Owls.
Hmm.
But one night I remember waking up. I couldn't sleep. It's about 2 o'clock in the morning. I get up and I'm like, you know what? I want to tell this story, and I remember it pretty well. I was just talking about a cool arrest I had while I was part of this crime suppression unit. So I sat down and I started writing about that one. I started writing about another one, and then in the course of all that, you write about all the people that you work with. So
Hmm.
all of my work, if you read any of the reviews, any of the bad reviews are, oh my God, could we hear how much he loves this guy or that guy enough? And my answer to that is no. You're not going to hear. You're never going to hear enough, because I wouldn't have a career if it wasn't for the men and women that I served with. So. Uh, I write in a way, with my thought is always, if I don't tell you the stories of these people that I work with, you'd never know who they were, because they're unsung, they're humble, they're not out there for the spotlight like me. I'm an attention hound apparently, but
Hmm.
again, that was never the intention. It just wound up being story after story, and let's face it, cops and robbers always sells. So, a little town like Savannah, it's the big city on this side of the coast, but it's got a very small town mentality. The first book was big news. It was big news. When I expected I was going to give, uh, you know, 50 of them away, and almost immediately I was selling thousands of copies. So that was a huge reinforcement. I'm like, wow, I got more stories I can tell. So the first one came out, and basically I wrote from the beginning of my career to the end of my career, uh, and went through my trial and all that stuff in a very dramatic fashion. Well, like I said, that book landed hard. It landed hard. It did very well commercially, and it showed me. I was like, wow, it's kind of cool. It's kind of fun. I got more stories. So the next book is called Ruffian. It's about
Hmm.
uh, basically a domestic counterinsurgency that we ran in two neighborhoods that were just violent and gang infested. So we kind of we drew a roadmap basically of how an overt operation and a covert operation happening in neighborhoods simultaneously. We were out shaking hands and kissing babies and saying, "Hey, we're here to help. What can we do?" While in the meantime, we're buying drugs and getting search warrants and kicking in doors. So when I'm telling the neighborhood, "Hey, listen, we're going to clean your neighborhood up," they're like, "Yeah, yeah, we've heard this 1,000 times."
Yeah.
And a week later, we're kicking in the dope boy door at the end of their block. They're like, "Ooh, maybe they're actually going to do something." But it's a very truly community oriented operation that we did very much in the public eye, while very much clandestinely using informants and that kind of stuff. So Ruffian talks about those types of operations, the use of informants, basically what I consider the roadmap for what effective policing should be today.
You
Very
mean you mean
intelligence led.
you mean community policing that everybody says that we need to go to that's been around for decades anyway?
Yeah, but actual community policing where you're actually talking to people, but you're still locking people up. It,
Mm,
it seems to be where everybody thinks community policing is just the shaking hands and kissing babies. And believe me, there is a place for that, and I think it's very very important. But there's also time to put foot to ass, and you have to do that.
mm,
And if you're not doing both, you're not going to be effective. So that in a nutshell is what Ruffian was about. And it's one of those things where I've been out of the game for unbelievably almost 12 years.
yeah.
So everybody's like, "Oh, listen to this old guy talking like he's still." And I know that the game is very, very different. The technology where when I was
Yeah.
working homicide, maybe a search warrant for a cell phone, maybe a search warrant for some social media like MySpace, or I think Facebook was just starting. Where now homicide investigations are multiple cell phones, they're multiple, uh, you know, social media sites and YouTube videos and all of these things. They even go into music lyrics, which I think is an abomination, but
Hmm.
that's neither here nor there. But there's so much uh, work that needs to go into these cases now, and I'm well aware of those facts. But what has never changed, not in the several hundreds well, 2.5 hundred years that this country's been in existence, is communicating with people. Police work cannot get done unless you are communicating with people. Good
Hmm.
people, bad people, good people who make bad decisions, bad people who make good decisions. If you're not communicating with all of them, you will not be effective in a law enforcement capacity.
Yeah, I completely agree with you being just a civilian that supports law enforcement. And this is going a little bit off the cuff, but I think about, some of these, I don't want to get too political, but some of these blue cities where, it's my impression that police officers are, no pun intended, handcuffed. I've heard of this before. It's like, well, we know, this guy is committing these crimes, but he hopped in the car and sped off, and we're not allowed to chase him. What the, come on. But you see, to your point, you hear some of the people that live in those neighborhoods that are completely crime ridden, and you hear them say, I'm afraid to go out of my house. We've got to walk the kid to school. We got to do this and that, and I'm tired of it. And I would think, and maybe I'm naive, you work with some of these good people in these neighborhoods, that know exactly where the crime is, that you could make a lot of headway.
Well, the thing is that, you know, very early on. So I'm a white boy from Connecticut, and my
Hmm.
first beat was a housing project in the deep South. So when I put my boots on the ground and walked through the neighborhood, I stood out immediately, and it
Yeah,
was not because I was physically imposing or devilishly handsome or anything like that.
yeah.
I was,
You don't belong here.
yeah, exactly. Oh, and they let me know it. Believe me, it was I'll never forget the first day I got cut loose off training. I'm driving through. I got my windows rolled down so I can hear everything, and I look, and there's, a dope boy standing right on the corner, not being shy about who he is or what he does. And he looks at me, and I'm just out of the army. So I give him the greeting of the day. I said, "Good afternoon, sir." And he said, "F you, police." And I'm like, "All right, that's cool." I'm like, I can see that I'm welcome here. But, I knew immediately that dude was clean, because if he was doing anything, he'd have been like, "Hey, Mr. Officer, how you doing?" But if he's telling me go make love to myself, right off
Mhm.
the bat, then he's probably clean at that point. But the thing, it was very early on where I could walk and drive through that neighborhood and see the look on people's faces, the look of distrust, the look
Mhm.
of like and fear in a lot of cases. You got the guys standing on one side of the street who don't live there, but they know that this is kind of a haven where they're safe and protected,
Right.
so they hang out there. Well, then you got grandma across the street with her two toddlers that can't play safely in their front yard, and that was when I was like, you know what? This ain't happening anymore. So I wreaked havoc in my first beat, letting those guys know that this was not going to be the place. And then, over years, you fine tune that. You learn the quality of life issues aren't that important for enforcement. However, that's what you use to get to the bigger stuff.
Right.
And the bigger stuff for me was always guns and always violence. It was one of those things where uh, if people were shooting in my beat, I'd lock everybody up, and I didn't care what it was for. I was big on littering. You would ride. You would go like, "Oh man, you can't cut me a break for that." So as soon as they stop shooting people, man, I'll start cutting breaks for whatever. But as soon as it gets violent like that, it's not tolerable, and that, of course, grew into far more complex investigations. And the other thing in law enforcement is that cooperation between local, state, and federal, and how essential that is. I met Lou at the end of an OCDF case that he was doing. They had done a whole bunch of buying guns and drugs and that kind of stuff. So that was the first time I saw it, and I was like, "Whoa, that's cool." And then about a year and a half later, he and his partner Toby Taylor, who's the director of the ATF down at FLETC now, over the schoolhouse, they were rolling into my neighborhood, and I knew everybody, the who's, the what's, the baby mamas, what car they drove, what car, if they're riding with something, they're in this car. If they're riding without something, they're in this car. And that, just basic patrol techniques of knowing who is in your neighborhood, who belongs, who doesn't belong, what's right, what's not right, and that very simple stuff turns into very complex answers for very complex problems.
Mhm.
And all of
Exactly.
that boils down to people. All of that
Yep.
boils down to the people in the neighborhood. And as soon as the people in the community trust that you are going to do what you say you're going to do, then they start to become forward. They start to come forward and kind of point you in the direction. If not give you the information, they definitely point you in the right direction, let you know you're on the right track or not. But
Mhm.
that's why police conduct in today's day and age is so important. And it's not the big stuff, the shootings and all that kind of stuff that you see in mass media, because that, I don't believe that to be the problem that it's been made out to be in mass media, because no police departments in any part of this country are indiscriminately going out trying to hurt or kill people. That's not the
Mhm.
intention of law enforcement in any way, shape, or form. And I think for a long time we got off the path of that. We would show so much of these segmented videos saying, "Look, they're out here killing people." I'm not saying it doesn't happen. I'm just saying it is nowhere near the problem that it's been made out to be in mass media. But
Correct.
what does matter are the little things. When you go in and you're a narcotics agent and you kick in somebody's door, okay? First of all, it's probably somebody's aunt. If it's not their house, it's their aunt, it's their mom, it's their grandmother, it's their uncle, it's somebody
Mhm.
who's not involved in criminal activity.
Yeah.
And you go in there and you tear through that house and you flip over pillows and you empty drawers out onto the floor and you knock over pictures and you leave it a wreck when you leave. what kind of trust do you have? Does the community have into you? If you're going to do that
Good
to my
point.
home, why should I trust you at all? Or my car or whatever, and you can't treat everybody like a criminal, not even the criminals. Like I said, you got some really good people out there doing some really dumb shit, whatever the
Mhm.
circumstance. And we could get into socioeconomics and that kind of stuff, but there's no doubt in my mind the root cause of crime is poverty and lack of education and opportunity and that stuff. I agree with that, but we have to move past that. And what are we going to do about it? And the thing is, that's for City Hall. That's for our politicians to handle. All right, you guys deal with that. Law enforcement needs to deal with a very, very simple subject: keeping the good people safe from the bad people. And there's really we try to distract ourselves from that as much as we can with the feel good programs that we implement, things like coffee with cops and community intervention teams and that kind of stuff. That is not how you make the connections with the community. You make the connection with the community with your patrol officers caring about people and actually doing something about their problems. It People always go, "Oh, that's so oversimplified." It's not. It really is that simple. And I think we've gone so far away from that it's going to take a long, long time to reestablish trust in the communities and law enforcement.
Great points. Yeah, and I never really thought about this aspect. You made a number of great points, but one in particular, I always, whether it's on the news or one of these true crime shows, you see people go in with a warrant and everything is torn up in the house, and then you find out later that, yeah, that those people were completely innocent and somebody else, was actually the perpetrator of the crime. And I always kind of thought, it's like, who cleans up that house afterwards? And your point of, hey, you know what, we could come in and do our job, but still be respectful, is huge.
But and the thing is, think about it. Think about it from most people can relate to parents. Okay, so everybody has a parent,
Mhm.
and whether it's an actual mother, father, grandmother, whatever your family situation is. Okay, so you go and you encounter a citizen, okay, a person out on the street, and you think they're doing something. So you go, and maybe they're lipping off, maybe they're pushing all your buttons, trying to fire you up. You got to remember one thing in that situation is you're the professional, not them,
Mhm.
and you got to keep it that way. But now, introduce the parental unit. They come out and they see their child being harassed, harangued, or more importantly, they see something happening with their child and they don't know what it is. Okay. Now they approach you, and many, many times they are not nice about it. They're going
Mhm.
to use all the language in the world. They're going to get in your way. They're going to do all that stuff. But as soon as you engage and lower yourself and start saying, shut the F up, get the F back,
Mhm.
any of those, as soon as you lower yourself to that level, again, you are eroding the fabric of trust. You
Mhm.
gotta know how to talk to people. In some cases, now, don't get me wrong, in some cases, that's absolutely appropriate. That's gonna be the language you have to use, you have to speak in certain situations. But overall, you have to remember you are the professional in the situation. And as soon as you become unprofessional in that situation, then you're eroding that fabric, and that's where we have run into problems for a long, long time. And believe me, I'm not perfect. I've cussed out plenty of people on the street when I should have just shut the hell up. But we're human, and that's the thing. That's one of the things that I really try to emphasize in my writing is the human side of policing, because there's this misnomer that the police are robots, or they should know how to respond, or they should know how to deal with every incident, because they are the professionals. And the line I hate is, well, he signed up for that, or she signed up for
Yeah.
that. No, they don't. We don't sign up to get cursed at, spit on, shot at, and any of that. Nobody signs up for that, and I don't care which you are. Now, can you expect that it may happen in your career? Yeah, you signed up with a certain knowledge, but you definitely didn't sign up to just say, It's not a waiver saying, "Oh, I'm going to take all the crap you're going to put out there." Not at all.
Yeah, great points. Let's dig back into your writing because I'm going to ask you an unfair question.
No
You know,
such thing. No such thing.
kind of like, if you had three kids, which one is your favorite? You have three books in this trilogy. Is there one that is your particular favorite, one that you really gravitate to? Or is it just the latest one so we can sell more books in the new one?
No. Truthfully, I want everybody to read all of them because, first of all, they all stand alone. You can read one. It doesn't matter what order you read them in. They all sort of make sense. The first one's my favorite because, man, was that fun. It was talking about
Mm,
such a fun time in my police career, running and gunning. We're jumping fences, we're catching bad guys. I worked with I worked with a team of some of the funniest guys in the history of the world. But more important than favorite, I think the one that's going to stick with me the most, the one that really took everything out of me. I did not enjoy writing. Like I said, I tried to write it for 10 years. It was just, it was such a gut wrenching and soul stealing endeavor is this latest one. It just really, I mean, murder is the most fascinating thing that I think anybody will ever deal with. I never thought in a million years that I would interview a killer, okay, a guy
mm,
that I know killed somebody else, get his story, and then think to myself, well, damn, I get why you killed him. I'd have done that too. I mean, that makes sense to
mm,
me, which is the wrong answer from a law enforcement agent, and you can't act on that. But you definitely understand so much more about the human condition the more you see it. And I mean, you're talking in dramatic thing. Burnt bodies in trunks. Uh, we had a case just before I got into homicide where a son killed his father and made his mother help chop him up. Stuff like that.
mm.
You think that's just stuff in movies until you smell it. Okay, when you
Yeah.
go to a scene and you can feel it and you can smell it, and it sticks with you. It sticks with you for the rest of your life. It doesn't end when the cameras stop rolling. That's for sure.
Yeah, I've kind of got a line of, there's more horror in reality than Hollywood could ever kind of come up with in their mind.
Thankfully, thankfully, I
Unfortunately.
mean, if you can just dream up that kind of stuff, it's unbelievable. Like, I mean, who would think of beating an infant with a frozen water bottle?
Yeah, yeah, exactly. So what's next for Kevin Grogan? Another trilogy? Are you gonna, star in a movie? You gonna go and be a host on Dateline? What's next for Kevin Grogan?
Film. So for the last couple of years, actually, I've been working transitioning from writing books into writing screenplays. And right now, you know, I've gone up and down and been through learning the movie business. I've been on a lot of movie sets. A couple of my buddies have had some great success with acting and getting their story sold and that kind of stuff. But I've learned where in my writing, I'm telling 100% truth, very direct. In screenwriting, it's a whole different thing. You got to get that Hollywood effect. You got to make it a little more entertaining because just like regular life, you got the really, really cool stuff, but there's a whole
Mhm,
bunch of mundane, regular crap. And who wants to see that in a film or a show? You want to keep it as real but as entertaining as possible. So I spend a lot of time working on funding. So
mhm.
and here's my problem with my film career. All right. Eh, I am a very honest person. I'm very candid. I try not to BS people unless I'm kidding. But
Mhm.
my sales pitch is probably the worst sales pitch in the world. I start out by telling people, now listen, films are terrible investments. There's a very little chance that you're ever going to make any money on this. So that being said, you want to invest in my film? Yeah. Believe it or not, nobody's really wanted to invest in my film. So it's
Wow.
shocker,
Yeah.
huh?
Having been a former salesperson and led a sales team, we'll need to talk about your pitch.
No, but
Uh,
there's a lot going on. I've optioned the first book uh twice already. Nothing got made yet. But I have a strategy that's working pretty well. So we're gonna make a short film as a proof of a concept for another feature film,
nice.
and I'm hoping that once we get that one done, the other two will fall into place. But who knows? I've had a lot of fun with it. I've met a
Mhm.
lot of really, really cool people. And that's basically the direction I see it going.
Awesome. Well, I might turn on the TV or even go to the movies and see a Kevin Grogan, and I'll say, I had him on my podcast before he was famous, man.
Well, I try to give you a cool story to tell people. That's the thing. It's like, Lou and his, he had his show on
Right. On
the
HBO.
well, yeah, so they showed it on Max and the
Mhm.
Discovery Channel. But the first episode he did with, so it's Lou and a guy named Randy Beach, who's
Mhm.
a police chief, but another ATF undercover legend. And I'm sitting there and I'm watching them on camera and they're talking in the car like two consummate professionals, which they are. But I've been in the back seat in the car with those two, and those were not the conversations that those two had. Believe me.
Yeah.
No, it's just it's a lot of fun to watch, and I'm in part of I'm very blessed and lucky to be part of kind of a circle with guys that have had tremendously successful law enforcement careers, and now their books and their films are getting made. So I'm been very lucky to make a lot of really good connections with a lot of really good guys, which is, that's kind of law enforcement. That's the way law enforcement has always been for me.
Mhm.
I always get assigned to a unit with guys who are fantastic at their job and they made me better at mine. So I'm kind of experiencing that in the entertainment and media world.
Awesome. Well, I hope it works out for you. I am excited about reading your three books. I haven't gotten to them yet, but they're on my Amazon list, and I'm just gonna press proceed to checkout over here. For those folks that want to learn more about a Kevin Grogan, maybe they want to buy your books, they want to come and have you speak. Maybe they say, "Hey, you know what? I want to fund that whole movie and that trilogy right now." How best can they find a Kevin Grogan out there?
Well, the book's easiest to get on Amazon. I'm very, I answer all messages and that kind of stuff on social media. So it all started with Black Sheep, White Cop, Savannah Exposed. So my Instagram is Black Sheep, White Cop. I'm Kevin Grogan or Savannah True Crime Trilogy on Facebook. So social media is usually the fastest and easiest way to reach me. And I really enjoy after people read these books, interacting with them because trust me, there's a lot of stuff in there that they're like, I can't believe you said that, man. They're like, that shouldn't you shouldn't tell people that. And I'm like, hey, if you don't tell the whole story, don't bother
Mhm.
telling any of it. So that's really what I do with my writing, and I really enjoy going back and forth with folks. So, once you read the books, give me a call, let me know because I'd love to hear what you think. And always remember, reviews drive sales. So hit the review button and all that. There's my sales pitch. Reviews really help sales. And more importantly than that, I really want to know what people think because these weren't written for entertainment. They were written to help other people. Each book I want is anybody who's interested in law enforcement
Mhm.
to have a realistic idea of what they're going into and to understand a couple things that it's okay to not be okay sometimes and get
Mhm.
help before it catches you. I use my books as a precautionary tale of what can happen to you. I had a tremendously successful law enforcement career. I was involved in huge cases and always invited into the big ones. And I didn't take care of myself.
Mhm.
So it's one of the questions they ask you in your hiring interviews. Okay, you're on patrol and all of a sudden a hot call gets out. You're driving there and how do you proceed safely? And basically the crux of it is if you wreck on your way to that hot call, you're not helping anybody. Not only are you not helping the person that needed your help, but now you're drawing resources away from them.
Right.
And that's kind of what I did in my career. I wrecked on my way to the hot call, and I took away from a lot of other people. So now what I try to do is spread the word on how to avoid doing that. Don't be like me. I'm, everybody throws the word hero around and that kind of stuff. I am no hero. I'm not any of those things. All I was a cop trying to do a good job. And now I'm a former cop trying to help men and women going into the profession have a realistic understanding of what it is and how to avoid the pitfalls that I fell into.
I truly appreciate your candor. I appreciate your service to this country, both as a military officer and a police officer. And I'm really, really anxious to dig into your books. Kevin, thank you so much for spending some time with us today.
Thanks for having me, Ken. I really appreciate it.
My pleasure. And thank you to all of you who have either watched or listened to this episode of Public Safety Talk Radio. And we'll be back next week to wrap up this season of Public Safety Talk Radio.
Public Safety Talk Radio is produced by Bader Training and Consulting. Public Safety Talk Radio is also proud to be a part of the growing National Police Podcast Network. The National Police Podcast Network is a dedicated media network powered by the National Police Federal Credit Union, developed in partnership with experienced podcast professionals and public safety advocates. Learn more about the National Police Federal Credit Union at nationalpolicefcu.com.